Thank you for joining me as we make our way through Hebrews 11. Yesterday, we were thinking about the tent of the human body and our frailties and the way that God deals with that. As an extension of that, I want to just think about the way in which Jesus fits this same mold and the tent of Jesus' body. In John chapter 1 and verse 14, we read some famous words. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That's the part of John's prologue, the introduction to his gospel story, in which he introduces Jesus as the Word, the one who was with God and was God, the one who speaks God's word, in fact, who is God's speaking power, who is the creator and is equal with God and expresses God in every way. Now, this word, he says, came into the world and was not recognized. In fact, he was not recognized because he didn't come with great glory. He didn't come with smoke and fire and earthquake, visions. He came almost incognito, anonymously. That's what we recount each Christmas time, that God himself was born just as a baby. But the point is that in coming, he took human flesh. The Word became flesh. It wasn't just an apparition or in the shape of a human, a bit like the Greek gods' stories. Rather, he took human nature. We call that the incarnation, where God becomes one of us. And it's incredible, really, that he was God, and yet he shared our human nature. Earlier in Hebrews, in fact, it says he shared in our humanity. And then John says, yes, he took flesh, he became one of us, but he also made his dwelling among us. And that's the tent word we're thinking about. He pitched his tent. He shared our existence to the point of living among us. He wasn't at a distance, he came down to us. One of his titles was Emmanuel, God with us. And this pitching of his tent really was with us. He was born into a poor family. At an early stage in his life, he was a refugee. He lived under occupation. He was a manual laborer. In every way, he shared our existence. He really did pitch his tent among us. Now, this idea of God pitching a tent among us has history to it. I don't want to digress, go into some big diversion here, but the storyline of the Bible is God with us. From beginning to end, you can trace that story. Part of it, when you go to Exodus, you see there the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, and God rescues them. He takes them out of Egypt and then sends them on the journey to the Promised Land. They take longer than they should, but God is with them all the way. And just as they live in tents, so he does as well. The encampment of the Israelites you can see laid out in the book of Numbers, and the tribes are laid out around a central tent. It's sometimes called the tabernacle in older versions, or the NIV that we read calls it the tent of meeting. And that's where God dwelled. So he was among them. It was God with us in a tent. And even though he could live in the whole universe, yet he chose to come right down to live among his people. And he stayed there in this tabernacle for the next 500 years or so, from Moses all the way to Solomon. And then the tabernacle was replaced by the temple, but that's another story, so we won't divert into that. But it's part of the same story. Now, when Jesus comes along, we also have God dwelling in a tent among us. John says that when he came, they saw somebody who reflected God perfectly. It says in John 1:14, in the verses that follow, it says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. That's God that they saw. They saw the glory of God in Jesus. And therefore, they came to the conclusion that, yes, this one who is among us is God himself. more than human. But they did also see somebody who was fully human, God in human flesh, living amongst us, pitching his tent with us, as one of us, like us. And this like us actually is where the encouragement lies. If you go back to Hebrews in chapter 4, what you see there is the writer describing just how much like us he was. In Hebrews chapter 4, from verse 15, he says, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin." That puts it negatively. We don't have somebody who is unable to sympathize with us. Rather, we do have somebody who can sympathize with us. Why? Because he shared our existence and even understands our temptations. He was tempted in every way like us. Yet, of course, he was without sin. That's a very important note to put there. Because he was God, he was without sin. But because he was one of us, he understands the power of temptation. And how does that help us? Well, chapter 4, verse 16, Hebrews 4, verse 16 says, "So let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Since he is like us and has shared our temptations and our lives and understands our frailties and our weaknesses, we can pray with confidence. That's a big theme of the New Testament. Because of this, we can pray with confidence. He knows us, he understands us, he listens to us with compassion. He won't dismiss us, with an airy wave. "Oh, I haven't got time for you because you're so foolish." No, he won't do that. He will listen, and we can find grace to help us in our time of need. So Jesus shared our existence to the point of sharing the frail tent of the body that we have. But because he's God, he can answer our prayers. So don't hold back. Make the most of it, even today. And we'll see you tomorrow when we think about the last of the subjects from Hebrews 11, verses 8 to 10, which is thinking about the city with foundations.